You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
December meeting of the Greenwich Township Land Use Board is called to order.
This is the regular meeting of the Land Use Board of the Township of Greenwich. Adequate notice of this meeting has been given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, and that a notice was published in the Star Ledger and Express Times newspaper. Notice was posted on the municipal bulletin board in the Township Administration Building in Greenwich Township, New Jersey, and notice was filed with the Township Clerk.
Well done. Thank you, by the way, for the cards and everybody has an ornament and a card. Susanna brought those in, so
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Roll call.
Paul Beam, Class 1.
Right now, he's absent.
He's excused. I talked to him a half an hour ago, and I understand his situation, so yeah, absent and excused.
Okay?
Joseph Chichello, Class 2.
Here.
Frank Marchetta, Class 3.
Here.
Ray Buckwalter, Class 4.
Here.
Bruce Williams, Class 4. He's
Absent. He'll probably be late, but we'll see how it goes. He's excused if he doesn't make it.
Kathy Coleman, Class 4.
Here.
Gary Hill, Class 4. Absent, I guess.
Gary Hill?
Mm-hmm.
You heard from him?
No.
Okay, so right now, he's absent.
Don Marie Condas, Class 4.
Here.
Mark Scuderi, Class 4.
Here.
Joseph Fiamma, Alternate 1.
Here.
Jeremy Blunt, Alternate 2.
Here.
Bill Cognac, Alternate 3.
Here.
Pam Peslis, Alternate 4.
Very good. Thanks for the flag salute.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're gonna have to do that again.
Yeah,
We're all out of sync.
That was strange, wasn't it?
Is everything on? Okay, good. Forgot to check. Okay, so on the menu this evening, we have the minutes for October. I was not here, so I'll let somebody else make a motion and second it. Then we're going to do a couple of presentations, and with any luck, this should be a fairly short meeting. But thank you all for coming. So I need a motion for October minutes.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is anybody, I'm sorry, I should have asked, does anybody have any comments on the minutes? Quit smirking.
I didn't say anything.
I was hoping to get, does anybody have any changes or any comments on the minutes before we approve them? Okay, then I'll take I have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor?
Can you do a roll call so we
Yeah.
can see who's a yes, who's a no, who's an abstain, who's an absent?
For minutes?
Otherwise,
I have
Okay, you're the legal mind. Okay, roll call.
Joseph Chichello. Bill Cognac. Don Marie Condas.
Yes.
Pam Peslis.
Yes.
Okay, and then we have Paul Beam, Gary Hill, Bruce Williams, that are absent.
yep.
Kathy Cohen can actually vote. And then we have Jeremy Blunt, Joseph Fiamma, Frank Marchetta, Ray Buckwalter, and Mark Scuderi that are abstained.
Right, they are abstained because they're ineligible.
We weren't
Right.
here.
Right,
Mhm.
Correct.
okay.
Motion carries. Very
Do
good.
you want me to say that again, or you got it, John?
I got it, thank you.
Okay, so we have two things on the agenda this evening. First, Beth is going to do a presentation for us. We have, as you know, a job ahead of us to do a master plan re-examination, thank you. And so she's going to give us kind of an overview of what that looks like. What we want to accomplish tonight is we want to make a recommendation to the Township Committee, how this board feels about what we need to do with that, how detailed that needs to be, and then once Beth knows that, then she can come back with some sort of a budget estimate for the Township Committee. Then the Township Committee will have to go and consider what needs to be done and decide how to set a budget for that. And that process could take, what, a year? 6 months, or?
6 months to a year.
Okay. So you have the floor.
All right.
Do you want to just do it sitting from there, or do you want to, you can do whatever you
Let me
want.
stand up.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see everybody.
This is one for you, and this is one for Susanna for the file. You have enough?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I have to split in piles to work out one. Okay. So folks, this is just it's a quick presentation about the master plan. I wanted to talk to everybody about what a master plan is, what it typically contains, and and then what a reexamination report is and what that typically contains. So, another copy. One sec.
You got Bruce in?
Yep, she got it.
Okay, so first on the first page, or really the second page, is a listing of all your adopted master plan documents. I included this in there because I want folks to be reminded of what's been adopted. And when I say all of your adopted documents, that's not quite literal. It's really everything I know about since 2002. You certainly adopted things prior to 2002. I don't have them. They'll be relevant because I'll look through them later, but for tonight's purposes, I think understanding what's been adopted in the last 19 years is really all we need to focus on. So, most recently, of course, we have the housing element, which adopts or addresses a pretty narrow topic of your affordable housing obligation. But then more recently, we've got the open space and recreation element, and then the land use element, both from 2011. We've got farmland, circulation, and then your groundwater study previously. But when we talk about what are those documents that we're going to be reviewing most closely to see what your current policies are and how they might need to change, I'm going to zero in on the land use element in particular, and then also the open space and recreation and the farmland element from 2011. Since these are the most recent and are going to be the most relevant to today's challenges. So as we turn the page, you can see the permitted master plan elements. And I included this in here because, one, I want you guys to know what the options are available to the township for adopting master plan elements, but also because this list, I think, provides a pretty good overview of what the topics are that a master plan would typically address. So it's some of the obvious things like what are your goals and objectives, what are we on a township-wide scale, what are we trying to create or address, and then land use, circulation, farmland, open space, economic development perhaps. There's the green buildings and environmental sustainability plan, which is more commonly called the sustainability plan or the sustainability element. And then conservation, historic preservation. The one note, there's a development transfer plan element. That's only if you're going to do a TDR plan, which I don't think is something that we're talking about here. So while I wanted to include it just so this is accurate, I don't consider this is probably the only item on the list that's really not within your options.
TDR?
So TDR it's a transfer development program where the municipality facilitates the transfer of development. So you basically designate a sending area, so you designate a receiving area, and so the development rights, the rights to build residential units are essentially picked up from the sending area and moved to the receiving area. So you're moving the density. It's a really great program. Some towns have used it well. The planning for it is monstrous. It's really monstrous. It can create something really good, but I don't want anybody to think that this is a little program that can be accomplished. But also it requires a significant amount of density that you be comfortable with to do a good receiving area. So these are the topics, and there are also options in the sense that Greenwich Township can adopt any one of these individual elements if you see fit. You can, as you saw on the previous page, we've got a land use element, we've got a circulation element, a farmland element, so you can do one or all of these as you see fit. A lot of municipalities will pick off certain elements as the need arises, as the funding arises. Other towns will sit down all at once and try to get as many elements as possible, or as many elements as they think are relevant at once. So there's options available to Greenwich. The other option is to do a reexamination report, and this is something that a lot of municipalities will use to try to take inventory of what their existing policies are and how they might want to change them and why. So on this first page is A through D. It's just a quick summary of what I would say is an reexamination report, and it's simply what are the adopted policies? What are your existing land use policies, your circulation policies, farmland? What do we find in your existing master plan elements? And second, how have changes impacted those policies? And changes are internal and external. So one of the things we look at is what's all the new state legislation that's been passed since you last did your land use element, for example. How does that change? Does it change the policies in there, or should it change rather? And also what happens internally. So for example, in a reexamination report, one of the things that we would certainly write up is what's changed with affordable housing. So at state level, everything we've talked about several times already, about since the 2015 decision under the settlement agreement, the housing plan. But it's also the fact that you've adopted the housing plan and now you have 2 sites that are moving through the approval process. So those are examples of external and internal changes that you would apply. And then additionally, we're also going to talk about what's recommended. You know, we obviously want to go through this inventory, what's changed, and identify how have these policies impacted, and as a result, what changes are recommended. It might be as simple as updating an ordinance to reflect a new state statute. It might be updating the zoning ordinance, the land use plan map to reflect your new housing sites. Or it might be something much more significant, like instituting a new economic development program, retooling the changing of the RLM or the B district or the RCB district, whatever is appropriate. But that list of recommendations should be viewed as a to-do list of policy changes and ordinance changes that the municipality will take on. The reexamination report is intended specifically as this to-do list, so we include enough detail to provide support, your master plan support for making that change, but it's a difference of writing a few pages about land use topics that are in need of changing versus an entire element, and being able to explore all the conditions in the municipality and providing perhaps a study to support your policy changes. If there's a study necessary to support the policy changes, then that suggests that you need an additional study or you need an element in order to set forth what recommendations are. Okay? And then lastly is you're required to discuss what redevelopment plans need to be incorporated into your policies. So that's what are your existing redevelopment areas in your Greenwich School, for example. So we would talk about that, and we might also identify any other areas that might be eligible for redevelopment or at least should be considered for redevelopment. So that's that slide. The next page are the formal requirements for the reexamination report. It takes those 4 items that I just discussed and spells it out in much greater detail across 5 different topics. So I wanted you guys to see the legal requirements because it goes into much more detail, but it's a little wordy, quite frankly. And then lastly, I included the zoning map, just in case folks don't have it, just to put it right in front of you when you're thinking about the map. So ultimately, I think what we're talking about is the township making a decision to adopt, I think, a reexamination report of the master plan, but I wanted to, like I said, list all of the elements in case folks are curious about what the other options are, and like I said, to also give you an overview of what generally speaking, what the topics are that go into a master plan. So, folks, John, do you have a question?
When was the last reexamination report done?
So if you don't see it on my list, I don't have it, and I don't know.
We had a deadline of, what was our deadline, do you
No,
remember?
I believe I could be wrong, but I recall a reexamination report was done when the requirement was every 6 years. It's now every 10 years.
Yep.
So I think one was done, and I think I have it in my hard drive. I went on the township website, and it's not there. So I will,
Yeah, I suspect there's something in here that I don't have, but like I said, I don't have it, unfortunately.
And when-
So,
I'm sorry.
because the statute requires that the master plan be now reexamined at least once every 10 years, or if you do a reexamination, then it's 10 years after that reexamination.
So is it readopted after the reexamination?
No, so the way I'm looking at this, the master plan was substantially amended in 2011.
Okay.
You had 3 major elements. So 10 years from 2011 is 2021.
Your math is impeccable.
The other thing, though, in the back of my mind, as I hear Beth, is I think there was a reexamination done. I'm thinking it was done prior.
maybe with the land use element, was it a coupling?
I don't know, but I'm gonna look in, when I get home tonight, I'm
So
gonna look in the hard drive.
who can find the answer to the question of what the deadline is?
You know, me, Beth and myself.
Yeah, if John doesn't have it, what we can always do is go to the county, they're required to keep all your
Right.
master plan documents, so I
Correct.
can go through their files and
Yes.
see what
Okay.
they have.
So are you gonna do that, or will Beth do that?
John's gonna check his file.
I'm gonna
If he
check
doesn't
my
have the
file. If I don't
county,
have it,
go into the county and
Right,
check.
if I don't have it,
Okay.
Beth will check with the county.
Yeah.
If one was done, I have it.
So we think it's most likely it's 2021.
That's my gut, yeah.
Okay. So
we're
this is,
still on schedule.
we're on schedule, and this isn't like something that's a
Not an
major
emergency.
rush.
No.
So then the question I had, you also said there's elements, is
Yeah.
that the correct language,
Yeah.
that may be included in our master plan that you don't have because they predate your
Well,
involvement
that's
with
part
the
of it.
town?
Similar to whether there's a reexamination report, there may be, so John, if you have anything that's not on this list, send it to me. And as we.
I came in 2006, right?
Yeah,
I think
about that.
About then. I'll check. I don't think I have any elements other than what you have. All I think is that I have a, yeah, that's what I
That
think.
would be great.
Well, the reason I'm asking that
I
question,
think they were doing a reexamination in that 11, 12, when I was on committee, but I wasn't on planning board. I was thinking it was right in that time frame.
I'll check.
so we have an open task for John and Beth to confirm that. And if it is 2021, that's good, because that gives us plenty of time. I mean, it has to be done by the end of 2021, I presume.
Actually, it's going to be done within 10 years of either when the master plan was adopted, 2011, we'll have to find the month and the date, or 10 years from the date that the re-exam was adopted, we'll have to find out the month and the date.
Okay, so either way, we have time.
Yes,
Yeah,
Give or take a year,
right.
we have time. So, the other question, so if we're going to re-examine this, we probably need to know if there's elements that we don't have, in other words, we have to, what are we re-examining? We're re-examining the actual documents, right?
Yeah, so what I'll end up doing, regardless of when, whether John finds this reexamination report, at some point through this process, I'm gonna end up researching what all of your master plan elements are.
Yep.
So for example, most towns adopted their first master plan in 1975-ish, depending on the town.
Yep.
I'm gonna try to track down that information and get a copy, first of all, because, I just want a library of information for all my clients. If you guys don't have it, I can pass it on to you, but also, one of the required sub-items of a reexamination report should be to identify everything that's been adopted, just so you guys can keep track of all of your master plan.
Like, we can't re-examine what we don't have.
Exactly, yeah. And, I mean, to be fair, I'm gonna look at the last master plan elements in each topic. If you have, so we have your 2011 land use elements, your 1985, or whichever date that may be, land use element is gonna be much less relevant, but it's still important just to be able to track the history of how policies have changed in the township, and again, just for record keeping, so we know it was done, because it may become more important in the future as you try to track the zoning of a property.
Listen, when I came in, CCH came in. Before CCH, it was Banish.
Spanish, yeah, and I don't have all my files. from
Remember that name.
CCH.
Yeah.
So, then the last thing is just for you to be aware, and the board, actually Dawn was kind enough, we talked a little bit, maybe in the September meeting, but we talked about this and decided we should have some sort of a ninja subcommittee, the best of the best, to do this. So Dawn actually stepped forward. I think everybody else stepped back, actually, but Dawn actually stepped forward and agreed to put together a team to do this, because we can't have a quorum
Right,
doing this, so we have to reduce our number for people to really get into the nuts and bolts of this.
and I think that's a great idea, because I do want to talk about process, and I want to talk a little bit about public participation, which is a subcomponent of the process.
Perfect. So we have, and everyone on this list, your salary's getting doubled. So Mark Scuderi, Joe Ciccelli, did I pronounce your name correct? Ciccello. Sorry about that. And Pam have all agreed to work with Dawn. And so we really appreciate that. Now we have a lot of time, but, you know, better to start early. And the point of this will be, we have to get to some stage with the township committee where they can have a good feel for the scope of the project. And then once we know the scope, then Beth can say, well, this is about what we should budget. We could probably spread this over 2 budget years, assuming we get into 2021. If it's not January 1st, we'll have 2 years to spread that out a little bit.
Right.
So that's actually not a bad time to start right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Well, I was just saying, right, runs the gamut depending on what the scope is. I've done re-examination reports for $5,000 where the town really just needs to check the box and they don't have any new policies that need to be explored. I also did one for $75,000 where the town had a lot of issues that they needed to get through. So, I would say more average between 15 and 30 to get something good in place, but trying to narrow down that 15 to 30,000 is going to be largely dependent on public participation process and how many big issues the town wants to try to address.
Okay. So I think it's a good time, if anybody has any questions for Beth about the process or what we're going to do.
Can I put some ideas out for public participation first, just to?
Yeah, that would be great, actually.
So, what's required is one public meeting. I develop a draft, we bring it to a master plan notice public hearing, just like we notice the housing element, for example. And the board hears the presentation, you consider it, you vote. If you vote yes, then that's the end. That's the minimum requirements. What I'd actually recommend is something a little bit more robust than that, because this is the first time in a decade that you guys are going to be talking comprehensively about what the township land use policies are. So, typically I would recommend 3 public meetings. The first one is a public information session, just before the draft is put together, but after we've worked through either just the subcommittee or the subcommittee and the board, what issues or what challenges and opportunities you think there are, we bring it to the public, and the public has a chance to add or subtract anything as they see fit. So they might think of something else that their subcommittee hasn't thought of. So it's a way to get some information out there and to start to gather it, because it can save time at the end, rather than hearing new ideas at that one public meeting that was planned. So that's the first meeting, public input session. Number 2 is a draft re-examination report review public meeting, where the draft at maybe 95% complete is made available. Folks have a chance to review it, comment, and that goes for not only the public but also the board members. And so this way, we get to hear comments without the board being under pressure to adopt it at its final notice public meeting. And so then the last meeting is that required public hearing, where at this point, in theory, you've heard public comment, you've gotten a sense as to what folks' thoughts are, you have a sense as to what the board's thoughts are on the draft, and you can move forward with presumably adoption. So input, draft, and then public hearing. That's what I'd recommend. That said,
So number 3 is the requisite one.
yes.
Got it.
Yep. There are a lot of other options. I've done charrettes where we rent public space and ask a bunch of questions. We can do surveys that get either handed out or emailed, like an online survey for folks, just to try to generate some more input with, it might be yes or no questions, or what topics do you think are most important, ranked from 1 through 10, and then that gives the board a sense as to what issues are most important, what's really rising to the top across the public. So that's another option. That's actually a great way just to reach people that are less inclined to attend a public meeting, whether that meeting is on a Thursday night or whether it's on a Saturday. Some folks just don't have time or don't want to come out to the survey to know what's happening.
If you guys wanted to do a pure re-examination report and did not care if the re-examination report became part of the master plan, you actually don't have to have a public hearing. It's only if you want the re-examination report to become part of your master plan that you need the public hearing, because Section 89 of the MLUL governs the periodic re-examination. It doesn't require a public hearing. Section 28 governs master plan amendments and does require the public hearing.
But if we make any changes, then we can't
Well,
do that.
put it this
right?
way, the re-examination report could make recommendations, but if you want to not only make the recommendations, but have that re-examination report act as an amendment or as a change, then you have to have the public hearing. And that's going to make it clear,
But the township committee is the one that has to
decide,
all to adopt. They
yeah,
have to.
well, quite frankly, you could, no,
The re-exam is adopted by the land use board.
right. The master plan is a planning board document. The
Okay.
re-examination is a
Perfect.
planning board document. The statute puts the onus, it says, that the governing body shall, at least every 10 years, provide for reexamination. You know what that means? Provide means
Gotcha.
pay the money.
Okay,
So-
so it's our board that, we own this, we own this
So
process.
some boards go through the reexamination, they see, by the time you get maybe around the draft, are these just, I mean, if you re-examined it and it's like, no, we don't have to make any changes, then they don't go through the added expense. They still, it's good practice to have public participation,
Yeah.
but they're not gonna go to the added expense and do all the notices and have a formal public hearing if the re-examination report says everything's fine. If the re-examination report says some changes should be made, then instead of spending really big bucks to go in and change various elements and have a public hearing on that, then they go for the public hearing to make the re-examination report act as the amendment.
Okay.
But in other words, so you don't have to decide. You can say, yeah, we like the idea of public participation, but you don't have to decide ultimately if you want the formal public hearing until you see, you know, where the committee got after it brings it back and consults with the board.
Gotcha. It would make sense to me, just to throw out the idea to the board, that if once we know the deadline, maybe to communicate this through the website, just to let people know that this is a project that we have in front of us. And then, you know, as much transparency as we can so people know what's going on. And I guess we can't really decide when these various public meetings would happen until we know whether we have to make changes and how many.
Yeah, although you could hold those public input meetings, or at least the one public input meeting to help you decide whether or not you feel there are changes that need to be recommended, whether or not you want to re-examine, to be part of the master plan. Because maybe folks will show and say, we think everything is perfect the way it is, don't change it. And,
I would bet they don't show if they feel that way.
well, that might be true.
I'm just
but that
guessing.
would also be an indication.
Okay, so, Frank, you're the liaison to the township committee, so we would need you to make sure that you're appraised of what we're doing, since this doesn't actually go to the township committee for final approval. And, as far as communicating this through the website, do you think is that something? Yeah, I think that would be a good idea if you concur, unless anybody on the board has any qualms about that. Now, I don't think we should do that until we know the timeline, because we just, you know,
The way I would imagine, at some point you guys will ask me for, or the township committee, whomever will ask me for a proposal. As part of that, we'll start to set a timeline and start to set anticipated meeting dates. Now, I'm not gonna specifically include, May 13th in the proposal, but we'll start to get a sense as to what the schedule will be. And then as we get closer, we can announce the process is on the website and the meeting dates are so that folks are aware.
perfect. And then I just had a couple questions that might actually carry forward into Dawn's work, because as I was looking at your presentation, which I always bury these things over there, one of the things that popped out at me, just as an idea, you talked about historic preservation element, you also talked about redevelopment. As I think either one of those may apply to some, may offer some strategy to help reinvigorate this Main Street area that we're working with. Now, I don't know if that's something that, I mean, it'll be up to the group to decide whether that's appropriate or whether we want to go down that route, but that's, anyway, it occurred to me as I was looking at your presentation.
You know, one of the good things about a re-examination report is this is an opportunity, so let's take Main Street, for example. This is an opportunity to look at Main Street and decide what strategies should be implemented, what strategies should be considered, as opposed to, going through and doing the work. So we might look at Main Street and say, there are several challenges here. Or challenges and opportunities. There's historic preservation, and we can talk a little bit about what the historic resources are in town, or on the street, without going into great detail, but simply identify what we can know from a cursory review of the available information, and then have a recommendation that says the township should consider a historic preservation element that would further explore this. There may be environmental issues in this area, so we can identify, again, review the available information and say perhaps the township should consider an environmental study to address A, B, and C in this area. And so a re-examination report can be used in that way to sort of create your checklist of to-do items for certain issues in town.
So for anyone else on the board, and eventually the public, I presume, as we go out with this, if you have any ideas about anything that you feel that we might need to address, I think we have the basic outline of what these elements are. Communicate them to Dawn, and then then her subcommittee can take those things into consideration as they work through this. Does anybody have any questions for Beth? If I don't hear any questions, I think that's a wrap. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, the next thing and last thing we have on our agenda,
Very nice.
MJ Hoffman. Is MJ Hoffman present? Are we to address you as MJ?
MJ is great, I love it.
Okay,
We're
so,
a green company, so I didn't print off a bunch of stuff, but I have some of my brochures here that each of you can see what we're talking about.
thank you.
Did you print out those pictures that you sent?
I did not, so I did
But you
put
can,
some
you
on
have stuff in here though, right?
What? There's lots of information in here.
Well, while MJ's passing that out, let me explain what I think on the agenda. It says presentation regarding solar. So, and you're from Vivint Solar? Vivint Solar, okay? So, my understanding, and you can fill in whatever I miss, MJ, is that Vivint Solar has been, talking to residents in our town about installing solar panels. And so we have zoning that actually prohibits the application of solar panels to the street-facing side of the house. So what I'm going to instruct you tonight is, I know you probably know tons about green energy and, all of that stuff, but really the issue here is the zoning, and it's the aesthetic issue of the panels on the front of the house. And so, I'm not speaking for you, but I assume that you're going to give us some information for this board to consider whether or not we want to have that kind of a restriction in our zoning.
Exactly.
So, we'll let MJ make the presentation, and then you guys can ask some questions. We're not going to swear her in as an expert witness. This isn't testimony. This isn't an application. This is informational and maybe relevant to, this master plan review process. We can ask questions and make comments when she's done. Take it away.
Definitely, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you for starting the email interaction. I sent some images to some of you, and if that is something that the rest of you want, we can definitely share those via email. But as I said, we're a green company, we try to do our favorite stuff.
Right, but the board it's a public body, and they do their business in public, so they're not supposed to consider things that you send via email. That's why I emailed you back and said, print them and hand them out, then everyone would be able to see them. So they were not distributed to board members.
No, and that's what I gave the brochure.
We have this.
Yes.
So this is sufficient.
Shows
Yep.
pretty plain, yes.
Okay.
So first, how y'all doing? We're gonna try to keep this short. I see some good stuff, thank you, Beth. Anyway, my job here in Greenwich is, as a solar sales manager, I find homeowners who qualify for the state and the federal incentives for solar renewable energy. Pretty much what that means is I go to homes and I help them do a cost analysis of their electricity, and if it looks viable for them to have solar, and if it's beneficial to them, then my company helps them get solar. I've made it to some of your homes, and I haven't made it to some of them. One reason, maybe I just haven't gotten to you yet, but one reason is maybe you have a flat roof and I just skip over those. Or you have too much shade, I skip over those because it's not worth my time. And the fourth is this ordinance, that half the community is not eligible for the federal and state incentives. And so this ruling was put into place, as you said, I think the aesthetics. That's a big issue with it. Back when the ordinance was put into place, solar was not very common. And when it was put in, there was racking on the roof that was just aesthetically not pleasing. there were conduits that ran across the roof to get down to the electric panel. Not very well designed. And then also panels were blue with silver spots or stripes. I'm sure you've seen those around the community. There's plenty here in Greenwich. They just look kind of goofy. And so that's definitely understandable. I understand this ordinance completely, that it was for the protection of your township. It doesn't look great when you've got blue all over the place. But, that major problem is something that we want to address here. One of the downsides of having this ordinance is the solar renewable energy certificate, called SREC for short. That is a state incentive, and any homeowner that has a south-facing front to the street home, is not allowed to have it facing that direction. South is the best, that's where the sun is, morning, noon, night, through summer and through the night, but through the winter and through the summer. Your south is the best direction, and that's where you get the sun hours, and so that's where you get the best generation of electricity from solar, and if you're facing that way, you don't qualify for it. And so, if you have to have it on the north side of your house, your opportunity to gain those incentives drops drastically. There's just not the money for it. And so with SREC, hopefully you understand what they are, but it is for every megawatt of electricity that a homeowner generates, the state gives them a solar renewable energy certificate, an SREC. And that SREC as of today is worth $225. It changes, it's a market, it's like the stock market, but in this whole year of 2019, it hasn't gone below 220. So I calculate with all my homeowners about 220, just because that's the base for this year, and it's gone up to 235 actually, as part of the part of this year. And so with that, if a homeowner has their solar on the north, they have a lot less opportunity to generate electricity from the sun, even if they have more panels. And so they aren't able to get that money. And I went through, and the email I was talking about that I can print off pages as we come to a variance or whatever. If we need to have someone come in here, then I'll print off enough. But I have a couple pictures. This one is the first customer that I have. I love solar, but she has strictly north and strictly south, and her south is the street. And she would lose $60,000 over the next 10 years because it's in the back instead of the front. It's not facing the south. The next one is another $16,000.
Are you looking at, you're describing pictures?
I am.
Okay, we don't have them, is what I'm...
Right, so I'm using verbal, I'm
Ah,
using
okay.
this as my...
Okay,
my
got it,
research,
okay.
not for you to see.
Okay.
I could pass around my iPad if that's beneficial.
I mean, I think we
understand the concept.
understand the concept, yeah.
So the biggest one lost here, there's a $28,000 loss on one of the homes here because she can't have it in the front. She can only have it in the back. That's a lot of money.
How do you
that-
define the loss? Sorry,
The loss-
is that annual or just the loss of the,
Over 10 years.
over 10 years? Okay.
It is a 10-year commitment. The SRECs are promised for 10 years, and they're actually coming to an end by the end of 2020. And so we're trying to get as many as we can to take advantage of those before they get cut off.
Are you saying that if it's on the north side, it's not economically feasible, or if it's on the north side, you can still do it, but you won't save as much as if it's on the south side?
It depends on the pitch of the roof. This one specifically that I have is north-south, and they could do it on the back. They could do it on the north side. It would only cover 50% of her electricity instead of 90% of her electricity.
Okay, so you're saying that
So
it's
you're-
not...
Yeah, let me just say,
Yeah.
so your lost numbers is opportunity cost, they're not losing money, because.
They're not saving
Okay,
as much as what you're saying.
They're not able to get enough SRECs to offset the cost of the installation, so these are,
That's not what you're saying.
So this
yeah.
one, she's gaining $17,000 on the back instead of $33,000 on the front.
gotcha. So there's an economic incentive, both for your company, obviously, because this is your business, and obviously for these residents that live in our town, who have an opportunity, but because of the zoning, aren't able to take as full advantage as they would like.
Thank you, yes,
Question?
yes.
When you calculate the loss, you calculate it, like, if they can get it on the north end, they would save X amount of dollars.
Is she saying
On the south
they
end,
can
they would
still do it,
save
but they're
more.
not gonna save as much
So
money,
the
or they
actual
can't do
loss
it?
is the
I think
difference.
she's saying they can still do it, but they're not gonna save as
That's
much
what-
money.
that's what
Just a
they're-
sidebar, if I don't want to interrupt you, but basically the way these companies work is if they can't get a certain amount of customers, it doesn't make sense because they're subsidized.
According,
they could
I
still do
checked
it,
into
but
this,
the homeowners would have to pay more out of
when I first
pocket.
said that it's the township preventing it, all of my bosses were like, no, it's the HOA, I'm sure. I was like, no, it is the township, they've never heard of this. So I went to my regional manager, and he actually said, there's no other New Jersey townships with this law in place.
I think we're going to challenge you on that. Yeah.
But he was able to
So,
find-
so you said something earlier, and of course the board, have you kind of made your
I was just
basic,
gonna say what Vivint has done to address the aesthetic issue. So, if you want me to say that first, or?
Yeah, why don't you let her get through?
yep, why don't you, wrap it up with that and then we'll.
Sure. So as I said, when I was first going, blue panels. We now use black on black. Number one, they're more efficient. Number two, they look better. Number three, they're not goofy. And we put a black skirt around the bottom, so you can't see underneath them anymore. Black on black makes it look like black on the roof. And there's been question on how's the reflection on it. And it's actually less than a cornfield, and we've got lots of cornfields around here, so ideally you can recognize that the reflection is not as bad as the corn. Second, our piping now goes straight down into the roof and through the attic. So the homeowner can see it in the attic and no one else can see it on the outside of the roof. So we changed the aesthetics to make it so that we're addressing that. That's something awesome about Vivint Solar. We listen to our customers and our potential customers and make adjustments. We're not solid in this has to be the way it is. We listen to what's needed.
So it would be fair to say, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, that the pictures in the brochure that you handed us are typical of your current modern, as aesthetically pleasing as possible solar installations, which we can see like here and in some of the other pictures.
Yes, so
So, so question, this one looks like the one you described, black with a black skirt. But this one looks blue with the old,
that one looks like the older one.
yeah.
So the front of these four over here have a different one than the rest of them, so I ran out, and actually it looks like Jeremy has the second. So there are two different versions, but the black on black one is here in New Jersey.
Gotcha.
This is a nationwide.
So this picture, MJ, is this picture pretty much represent what you're talking about?
This one does.
So let me give you the second one.
Ah,
Okay, there's two different brochures. This is the one that we did on This Old House, the TV show. This one is on This Old House. So yes, you got the Rhode Island one instead of the New
Can I
Jersey
see that
one.
right for a second?
What? Yeah.
New Jersey, yes.
MJ, how long have you been in Greenwich soliciting customers, or how long have they been reaching out to you?
I got here in Greenwich early or mid-May.
So, I don't know, are there any pending applications requesting a variance to?
No, and that's a good point, Jeremy. So I was going to actually address that to the board, just to kind of frame this and then open it up for questions. And so this is what you're saying is the currently aesthetic. So this is the best case scenario, black panels on a black roof.
Yes.
Kind of, I can see how that looks better than some of the other ones. So, and Jeremy brings up a good point. So have any of the, like you mentioned specifically 3 people who had some opportunity cost here because of their exposure, let's say. Have any of those people thought to apply for a variance? Because there is a procedure. I mean, the zoning is the rules, but there's also a procedure to get relief from those rules if you have a case to make.
Right.
And we're not aware of anyone trying to make that case. Is that something you're aware of?
I am here at the forefront of making those cases. I want to make sure that we have understanding, we have information, so that when we do the variance, we save time, we save energy on.
Yeah, so in that context, it's really somewhat out of order, because if you're going to, or if your company is going to apply for a variance on behalf of a homeowner, or if the homeowner is going to apply for a variance, then you would be testifying on behalf of the homeowner or your company. And so that would be the proper venue. This is informational, and we, I guess, assumed that you were asking us to change the zoning, but it sounds like you're actually giving us information preemptive of a variance application.
I would love for the ordinance to be changed. In an email I received this last week from one, I don't remember if it was from Mr. Willis or me, Rick. I read into the email that asking for an ordinance change is the job of the town committee. And so I thought I was going back to the town committee next week.
I think
to
email I
say,
sent-
Well,
Yeah, and that actually was,
me to you, and then that
committee
email
sent
thought I thought you were sending me back to them.
The town committee sent you here?
well, Paul, you met with Paul Beam, I believe?
I talked with him several times. yes.
Okay, so, yeah, so, and I stand corrected tonight, because I thought that the township committee would have to actually do the master plan.
Huh? If she wanted to apply for a variance, she comes here
With the homeowner.
with a homeowner. I mean, for example,
I would say, we didn't say this specific meeting, we just said, let's see.
no, but
Not to recall.
just so you understand, my understanding was what Paul had wanted MJ to do was make a presentation to this planning board and ask the planning board to make a recommendation to the governing body that they amend the ordinance to allow solar panels on the front of houses. Is that what you originally planned for?
That was my original plan.
Yeah, because,
Okay.
The email kind of twisted it.
no,
So you've changed your strategy a little bit,
It would-
I understand.
But just so you understand, it would be inappropriate to try to pre-pitch the board on a variance application. Because a variance application has to go out to all the property owners within 200 feet of the property. If you try to make a presentation to the board, like an overall, try to predispose them towards this, that would be very bad. So I think she has to limit what she's here tonight asking for.
So tonight, I
change the
think that
ordinance.
what we would do is consider the pictures and the information in the context that, since we're doing a master plan review, maybe we would look at the
That's a good
ordinance
idea.
as information for the folks that are looking at the master plan. If you were to come back to get a variance, which, as you heard earlier, the master plan review process,
she can't get a variance, the homeowner.
No,
Well,
just-
she can
yeah.
apply on
Just
behalf of the
understand,
homeowner.
In Clinton Township, in Raritan Township and in Clinton Township, those are, I represent the Board of Adjustment in Raritan, I represent the Board of Adjustment and the Planning Board in Clinton. There are two primary solar companies that come in and they strike the deal with the homeowner signs a consent, and
Okay,
the
but again,
solar
the-
company comes in as the applicant for the variance.
But the variance is to the homeowner.
Yeah,
It's
the
on
variance
behalf
is
of
to
the
that
homeowner.
lot, yeah.
That's all I'm trying to.
Yeah,
So
correct.
You're gonna have to sit through, she might come in here with 6 different variances. I'm gonna have to sit through 6 variances.
Well,
Why
see-
don't you just change it?
No, well, first of all, that's,
And then why should a homeowner have to wait for a master plan?
first of all, that we can't, the township committee has to change the ordinance.
No. She's here requesting that the planning board make a recommendation to the governing body one way or the other.
We can't talk about a variance because there's no notice. So to answer your question, and this looks better than the old ones, but frankly, and no offense, I still think these are abysmal looking. My opinion, everyone has their own opinion. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want to have this process, I wouldn't want to be undermined as a resident, all of a sudden have these going up all over town without having my day in court to come in and talk about it. So in the variance process, you notice the neighbors. If all the neighbors come in and they say, we don't have a problem with it, and the board says you make a good case, then you get your variance. That's the Board of Adjustment's job.
Then you're pitting neighbor against neighbor too.
That's the Board of Adjustment's job. I've been doing it for 20 years, Bill. That's the way it works.
Can I ask you another question? Have you checked the ordinance to see if in Greenwich you can have ground-mounted residential? You can, can't you?
You can't have ground mounted, it is written on the ordinance.
Right, because again, in Clinton Township and in Raritan Township, if people have an ordinance that says you can't have them facing the street, those people come in with ground mounted in their backyard facing south. have you checked out, are these lots too small for the people that couldn't get them on the roof?
Many of them are. My company does do ground mounts. We have a pilot program going right now, and you have to have 10 feet all the way around, and it has to have not only structures within certain
Right,
angles.
but the people who you use as examples,
So,
could they have ground mount at their houses or not? Because if they could have ground mount,
most of these, no. Most of them, no. The lots are tight.
That largest one, you know, or just small lot?
I mean-
Let's look at the 28,000.
Okay, so we're not talking about a variance application here, we're talking about information in advance of changing zoning. So if anyone on the board has questions, why don't we go ahead and you can,
I have a question. So since May, how many takers have you gotten?
So we have 4 fully installed, we have 2 more scheduled for January, and we have 4 more who are in the permitting process right now.
How much the cost of the homeowner?
Nothing upfront. So wherever they've been paying an electric bill, most of them are actually just choosing a lower electric bill that has been locked in for 20 years. And so whereas, generally, electric companies are increasing 5 to 6% per year, we lock it in at 2.9%. They lease it, my company takes the incentives, and just sell them power back at a lower price than what they've had to pay. And they also know for the next 20 years exactly how much they're gonna pay.
So when you sell the house, the package goes with it?
Goes with the home, yes. And then if I have some who are owning, and they're paying a little bit higher for the electricity, then, so instead of paying 169 that they've been paying, maybe they're up to 210, but then these incentives are paying about $200 back to them. So their electric bill is now down to $10 instead of 160. So it's different with every home, because every home gets a different amount of sun, which means the number of panels needed to get enough electricity for your home is adjusted. I'm happy to come to anyone's home and do a free cost analysis for you. That's just what I do.
okay.
This is my area.
You got one free sales pitch.
I have a question. Do you work for a solar company? Because you did work for a solar company, right?
you look like someone who worked for a solar company.
Or you owned a solar company?
Ah,
Oh, okay.
you were more right than wrong.
How many years ago was that? 6 years ago, maybe, you came around. So how many takers did you get?
More than I can handle.
Oh,
Hmm.
how about that?
And I don't advertise.
So,
Are you working with MJ?
You don't have.
Oh, okay.
Do you know each other?
What do you get? So, do you get to come across people who have the issue of mounting on the front? Like,
Yes. And I talked to the zoning officer, the previous one and the current one, and my feeling is that the ordinance, when it was proposed, was self-serving for certain people, and it was wrong.
Did you ever do any ground-mounted installations where they couldn't do it on the front of the house on the roof?
Most people would want it in the rear, and I will not put it in the front.
No. Okay, I know that most people want it ground-mounted. If they couldn't have it, because the ordinance prohibits them from having roof-mounted solar panels at the front of the house, and their house faces south, how many, if any, did you do ground-mounted systems in the rear of their house so they could face south because they couldn't put it on the roof?
Most of them.
Okay.
But if you're looking at that comment, if you put it in the back, it's still facing the street.
Yeah, but the,
It depends on what the zoning officer wants. I've run into this in other towns.
right, but in Greenwich, the ordinance allowed ground-mounted specifically, so that if you had a southern-facing house, and the ordinance didn't allow it for aesthetic reasons on the front, you could put it in ground-mounted. I don't think any zoning permit was denied for a ground-mounted system in someone's rear yard.
so in Greenwich, given our sun, and assuming you've got not trees, how many solar panels do you need to get enough electricity? Is it possible to roughly say that?
This homeowner, she generally uses, 15,000 kilowatts. Having it on the back, she was getting 8,000 kilowatts, and having it on the front, she was getting 15,000.
But
How many panels?
How many square feet or something?
Panels, let's see, 2, 4, 5.
This guy got a good installations. That's the fact.
the easy ones.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he came in with all the easy ones.
So how many square feet is that?
40 square feet.
Well, because I think the ordinance says something like 200 square feet,
I
doesn't it?
don't remember, I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah. I'm just, I think there's some,
About 645.
but I have to check it, because
I don't
I
remember.
thought there's a size in the ordinance.
Hers, let me look at it.
On the ground mounted, you mean?
Yeah,
It might be on the
It
ground.
might be on the ground
Yeah.
mounted, so it wouldn't look like you had a,
Yeah,
you
a
know,
farm.
a commercial installation.
Yeah.
About our ordinance situation. If we, want to change the ordinance, but we said that, we may have to wait until, correct, and soon, we have to wait till our.
No. You don't, no. Whatever the planning board wants to do, the planning board
Oh, okay.
can do.
Because I'm looking at a timeline for folks that are going to be involved with this. And if it's going to take a year.
What timeline do you have? You have a timeline there?
No, she said that that the commitment for the program ends in 2020, ends at the end of 2020.
How is that possible?
Yeah, but
Yeah, but then it does, but then they renew it.
And then you get your
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the state has to,
Okay.
I'm understanding, so I'm understanding.
the state has to reauthorize the SREC program, and I think the current one is only authorized through 2020, so as long as you get your panels, you have the 10 years of SRECs available to you, but you can't start it post-2020.
But that assumes that they're not, that
2021,
assumes
whatever it
they're
was.
not gonna
Right,
It's not
They always-
necessarily
they
a
always
hard
renew it.
deadline, they renew this periodically.
yeah.
Do it all, well, do we know that at the end of 2020, that it'll be done?
I'm sure the solar company will tell you they don't know.
Right, I can't imagine they're not gonna renew it.
But,
And that was my consideration, if we had to wait for the master plan.
We've had some grid scale projects in the past, and I know that I know what drives it is that there's a renewable energy requirement that the state has for the power companies. The power companies use these programs in order to meet that because they can't get it all in grid scale, and we don't have a lot of windmills, and we don't have any dams. So at the end of the day, unless the power companies are meeting that requirement, which I think is like going up to 7 or 8%, do you know?
Which percent are you asking?
The percentage of renewable energy that the energy companies are required to meet.
So the goal for 2021 is 22.5%.
Right, so if they're not going to meet that, right, so if they're not going to meet that, that SREC program will be reauthorized. So the chances that they're going to get to 22% in a year, when they're only at 12 now, you'd have to build a lot of solar panels. So it's not that we don't know, but it's not necessarily a hard deadline that this whole thing goes up in smoke. When this program runs out, more than likely, there'll be a new SREC program started for the next round.
so are your customers under the impression that going through the variance process is some foreboding type, issue for them to go through? Because, I mean, this is no more than, we did, a variance for virtually every deck in Greenwich Chase, okay? We were knocking off 3 a night at a time, so, not to say that that would happen or that we would approve, but it's not like, doing a D variance or, a use variance or anything like that. People come in, they fill out the piece of paper, they give some testimony, and of course, they gotta notice the neighbors, and unless the neighbors are jumping up and down, certainly in the case of decks, they all got approved, okay? So
How are my customers feeling? This first one that I worked with, she was like, I don't have time to do that. I want this, but.
Right, but see, if she signs a consent, you can do it.
Then I can, yes, and that's what I'm here for, is to figure out what's my job and how can I
Well,
get this.
Okay.
No, that's.
So I think we understand your position, and I think and so if we have, and certainly people can ask more questions. I don't want you to speak about variance applications anymore because you can't testify without noticing, and that would be inappropriate. But if there's anything that you think we don't know, or if anybody else has any questions for you, then the Land Use Board can also consider this as information, relevant to our actual zoning versus, an exception. Okay?
That was my original plan.
All right. So,
I just wanna make sure she understands what you're saying. When you look, you're looking to address it when the master plan, is what you're saying.
Well, we don't have to wait until the master plan renewal. I mean, we can address a zoning,
She wants to find out.
at any
If we're
time.
gonna address it, when are we gonna address it?
right.
So that's what she, right, that's what you want.
I would love to know that.
Yeah, so I don't know, can you make that determination now?
Well, it's up to the board. I think we'd have to have enough people on the board that said that they would like to change this
I
zoning.
mean, Frank, you don't need us. I mean, the township committee does the ordinance. You could change it.
You
No,
could.
the town committee wants a recommendation, so if the recommendation is, we think it's good as it is, that's fine.
Well,
I'm just saying when to do it.
I'm saying, well, I would think that if we're gonna do a recommendation, we'd need to look at enough, and that'd be part of the reexamination or something.
Then that would be the recommendation. The recommendation would be,
want to wait for the re-examination.
Well, our recommendation,
And ergo, the variance process.
our recommend,
exactly.
So without saying variance, MJ,
Yeah.
that's your direction.
yeah. Yeah, so our recommendation can be anything from like, hey, we think we should change this tonight, which obviously doesn't happen because you have to wait for a meeting, to we should fold this into the process of reexamination,
Which is fine.
or anything in between. I mean, it's up to the board. And, so
Go down the line.
we'll go around and we'll ask what people want to do, but I want to make sure all the questions are answered, because, does anybody have any more questions?
So if we're looking at the pictures here of the black, is there any other choices out there maybe that you don't sell, or somebody else sells? Like, I thought I heard.
Blue is still available.
I thought I heard that there were now shingles that actually have things built on the front.
Yeah.
So Tesla started working on that. They backed off that project. Their technology was not yet up to speed that they could offer it for less than 50 times what we're doing this for.
Actually, Dow developed that and sold it to Tesla, but yeah. Actually, Dow developed that and sold it to Tesla. Tesla sold it to a private equity company, and they're struggling because it's too
It's
expensive.
just not working.
Yeah.
And I know black attracts, but are there any plans to match the actual roof colors that people have? Like gray or, those
Right,
other
she wants to,
colors?
can they be color, no, she wants to know, can they be colors other than black? Ask her,
Yeah, because
ask
not
her.
everybody's like black.
So just ask her.
That would be one of my questions, can you make it match the room? I don't think they can.
We can make
I think I don't need it.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And if the roof matched the
Yeah.
panels.
Any more questions? Joe?
There are other companies in this market. You mentioned Tesla. I know the Home Depot often had First Solar or one of those. So there's different styles, I think, and different companies involved here. So you represent different, but we have to consider others. And I think our neighborhood is all, or largely,
Very good point.
roof age.
Everybody gets in.
Whatever color they want.
Which is,
Unless we regulate them like this.
Unless you regulate the color.
We have someone
That's a
actually
very good
come
point.
out and check the roof. Some roofs have more wear and tear than others in the same amount of time. And so we have our surveyor check it, he takes pictures, he sends that up the line to his advisor, and sometimes two supervisors up. And if it looks good, we guarantee that that roof will be good, brick solar, for 10 years ownership, 20 years, lease. And so we do check the roof, we will not put it on anything that's not compatible. And then if they do need to change it, then we let them know, we'll pull it off. We'll actually do the roofing with one of our contractors who gives a crazy deal to us as Vivint, and then put it back on at no charge to them. If they want to use their own roofer, then we'll charge them a small fee for the removal and reinstallation. And so we do need to make sure the roof is strong enough, and that the roof has some life left, but we don't guarantee that it will have 10 full years or 20 full years.
I'd like to just follow up because Kathy jumped in there with a very good question, but Joe made a point that was actually quite outstanding, and maybe I'm obtuse, but I want to make sure everybody understands that if we were to change our zoning, it wouldn't just be for these particular panels from this particular company. And I think that's what you are. Right. So I think we
Actually, you
have
can't
to.
discriminate between.
We wouldn't be able to discriminate, okay? So, for example, if you use the zoning process and somebody comes in and says, we want to put these panels on this black roof in this neighborhood, then that's something where you can see what the aesthetics are. And you have an opportunity, the neighbors have an opportunity to come in, see what it's going to look like, and you have some opportunity there. if we do change the zoning, you have to realize, and I understand, but if you do change the zoning, you've kind of, you've kind of opened Pandora's box in terms of all the companies with all the technologies,
Different colors.
whatever. So,
To be fair, I want to note that we can regulate some of these concerns, though. We can
You think you
talk...
can regulate color?
I think so. I think we can say panels are permitted to be on the front or street-facing side of the roof, subject to these conditions. It
If they're
might be,
consistent in color with the
yeah,
roof color?
consistent in color with the roof. One of a few different colors. I would regulate color.
The conduits can't be visible
Yeah,
and so on.
yeah, having the conduits, I would try to create some language about color consistency within the panel, because the old style were gray with or rather blue with the gray.
Yeah, the
differentiation.
Rhode Island, the
Yeah, the
booklet
Rhode
had
Island
the-
book, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Shape, the percentage of the roof that needs to be covered.
Yeah, that type of thing, yeah. So if folks wanted to, I don't want people to think that it's a black and white decision. It's either yes or no. There's a gray area in here that we can regulate and permit subject to certain conditions.
But to Ray's point, if you want, the maximum control you could have is, the rule is they can't go on the front unless they apply for a variance, then it's a case by case. That's the maximum control, but that's a policy decision
so
that you
by
guys have to make.
straw poll, how many board members prefer the variance process versus changing the zoning? Just by show of hands.
Variance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wow. I did not think it would be.
Yeah.
It looks like it's near unanimous that they're not gonna recommend that the ordinance be changed.
But if you can come back with that Dow Tesla system, because I've been watching that for 10 years. I want to put it on my roof, but you're right. It's almost commercially unavailable. Unless you buy a Tesla and you're a friend of Elon Musk, you're not going to.
I'm not there yet.
Me either. So, yeah, so there's two options, just to be clear. Your company could get your customers to authorize you to represent them, and you could come in and do a variance, or you could tell the customers to come in themselves. And Bruce made a great point. I mean, years ago, we had a situation in town where we had a lot of building envelope issues, and people wanted to build decks, but they couldn't because they were encroaching. And we did a lot of those. Now, that doesn't imply that a variance will be granted, but if an applicant can make a case and meet the criteria to get a variance, it's not an incredibly difficult process to go through the process.
And I could just say publicly, whoever is here, this is not necessarily directed to the solar company, but the type of variance case that someone might present is, okay, I know it's not allowed on the front, but this particular house has dark shingles, this is what the solar panels are going to look like, and there's a benefit to the environment if you grant the variance. Now, on the other hand, if you had a house in the Rhode Island brochure, you had a house that has Spanish orange tiles. You have the same black solar panels on that, you ruin the whole, look of the roof, that might get denied, whereas this one might get granted. That's why it's a case by case. People in the public understand what I'm saying?
Okay. Anything else, MJ?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take that recommendation back.
Thank you, Frank. I think that concludes the fun for this evening. Does anyone have anything else that we need to consider before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
You have a question from the gallery here?
Oh, yes, sir.
I just,
Can you identify yourself?
Bill Gullion, 13 Barnswell Court, Stewartsville. I thought this was supposed to be a big meeting where Petrucci and Coe were gonna be here.
Okay. So, just,
Sorry.
no.
No, question?
Very, very good point. They were originally scheduled. They've hit 2 snags. and it's gonna take them time to work out the snags, and Susanna, they sent in a letter requesting the hearing come off, and it's not going to be rescheduled to a date certain with no need for further notice. Once they resolve their snags, then they'll have to renotice for a date to continue. Susanna, do you have the letter here that you could read into the record?
I can get it.
Yeah, well, since people came out, I think that...
Yeah, that's fine.
You should read that letter into the
And while
record.
she's pulling that from her file, I just want to make a comment too. Our deadline for submission or to be prepared for is 21 days prior to the date of the meeting, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so for January, to your point, we'll try to make sure that we talk to these applicants so that we know with 3
Okay.
weeks lead time that we can put out an agenda
Okay.
so that, because this is actually got kicked almost to the last minute.
I
We
can
didn't
tell
know
you
if
this.
they were going to make it.
The Petrucci application is not going to be ready for January, and the Ross Stores is not going to be ready for January. The only application that might be ready for January is the Beatty subdivision, which I believe Mike Finelli declared complete, and the only reason I know this was because one of the Beatty relatives called me to ask me about the notice. So I would expect that at the board's reorganizational meeting in January, you'll also hear the Beatty subdivision. I haven't seen the thing, Mike has it, but my understanding is it's a lot line adjustment. It's not like a subdivision to create a new lot. It's a lot line adjustment, but it has 3 variances with it. Everyone can participate, but there's no D variances. So that's what my expectation is for the January meeting. Let's just see if Susanna can find that letter.
I'm looking for it. It's probably on my computer.
So there were 2 letters. One letter came in from Ross Stores, and the Ross Stores letter explained that what the attorney who was here was representing apparently the sign company that had been hired by Ross Stores to do the sign, and they didn't realize that they were under the impression that the building facade would lend itself to have the sign attached to it. They didn't realize until board members asked that, wait a minute, that doesn't look like what's out there, that they were going to have to actually do a renovation to the exterior of the store, which would require site plan approval. So the attorney for Ross Stores for the sign said that that's up to the landlord. And so that thing is off for the indefinite future until they get that thing resolved and get an application in for a site plan approval basically the structural and exterior work to support the signs. And then, I'm just trying to kill some time here,
I
but...
have it if you want.
There's the letter. Here's the letter from...
It is from John
speak loud enough.
Soupny.
Yeah, this is from the attorney, John Soupny, and it's addressed to Susanna, and it's dated
It's dated
December 4, 2019. It says, with respect to the above-referenced application, on behalf of the applicant, please accept this request for an extension of the hearing for the preliminary site plan approval to be carried from December 12th to February 13th. Due to the passage of time, we will reissue notices to the property owners within 200 feet of the property listed above and republish notice in the newspaper in anticipation of the new hearing date. As part of this request, the applicant consents to extend the time the board has to decide the application till April 30th, 2020. So the earliest this can be heard is February 13th, but you'll get new notices because, again, for them to get on February 20th, they're going to have to resolve their 2 issues by the end of January and do a plan amendment that has to be in 21 days before the February 20th date.
So do you also want to just cover on the record, Ross?
I think you did. Yeah, I did. When you were looking, I covered Ross. You have the Ross
I have the letter.
Oh, okay. Oh, this letter's written to me, dated December 3rd.
Correct.
Didn't even remember, Ray. By follow-up, I wanted to advise you and the board that the landlord will be pursuing the site plan approvals required for the facade alterations pursuant to their contractual obligations with my client. This is from the attorney, Michael McKenna. Accordingly, we will not be processing our signage application unless and until the landlord has completed his application process. So that's why I said that one's off indefinitely.
Sorry. Check the website for the agenda, though, before, because Petrucci would have been on here if it would have been scheduled for tonight, and it wasn't, so.
Quick question.
Yes.
You were talking about the master plan being required, and I wondered, required by?
Okay, so the municipal land use law, 40:55D-89.
By the state. Okay, I wasn't sure.
By-
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
The state.
Okay.
That's the difference between the legal answer and a real answer. There you go. Thanks, Frank.
State law. And it's not the master plan. It's that a reexamination. And it's not just a reexamination of the master plan, it's a reexamination of the master plan and the land use regulations. To be exact about it.
Ray, get us out of here.
Motion to
Okay,
adjourn.
you better do it quickly.
Second, all in favor? I think a few of us are going to Applebee's if